As Benita mentioned, I became a subject matter expert on emergency confiscations, basically based upon need. But because I've been doing this since 2013, it's become a passion of mine. Pardon me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Got it. Pardon me? Oh, just go forward. So first, I'd like to thank Leith Petworks for their sponsorship. This is really special because Leith Petworks actually started in Indiana, and Amy Young Leith was a co-chapter manager. We were sad when she and Scott moved to Salem, Oregon, but we were very. It was one of their life dreams, so it was great to see that realized. So thank you to Leith Petworks for sponsoring the talk. So I'm going to give a brief introduction, discuss the high-level details of an emergency preparedness plan. Then I'm going to shift the focus to Mara Hurwitz, who's going to share some information from animal cruelty conferences that she has attended on behalf of HRS. Then I'm going to cover some of the case studies, and then Edie is going to cover the media relations piece, which is so critical in emergency rescues. Then I have one slide on a future vision and conclusions. So the definition of an emergency rescue is really situation dependent. If you have an animal control or a shelter that has lots of capacity, if you get 50 rabbits, it's like 50 rabbits. I mean, it's important, but if they have the capacity to take it in, that's really not an emergency. But if you have a rescue group that doesn't have a shelter, and you have an animal control or a shelter that has no capacity to take in rabbits, then it becomes incredibly critical. Optimally, an emergency preparedness plan is needed prior to the confiscation. Putting this together on the fly, like we did in 2013, is really challenging. So we're going to be sharing learning from confiscations that have saved more than 1,000 rabbits, and again, the animal cruelty conferences. So one of the things that's really important is to identify rescue organization and shelter or animal control strengths. Sharing key learning from the conferences, again, establishing media contacts, which is really important, having a good relationship with a rabbit-savvy veterinarian, and having access to facilities where they can do very, very quick, low-cost spay neuters. And then, as Dr. B had mentioned, with rescues and veterinarians, relationship building is incredibly critical, as well as networking, and then finally transferring rabbits to other rescues. So I'm going to go over our organizational strengths in Indiana House Rabbit Society just as an example. So Indiana HRS is actually the state subject matter expert when it comes to emergency confiscations. We actually manage more than 10 of them. Our support includes catching domestic rabbits on the lam, medical evaluation and triage, on-site shelter care, leveraging our rabbit-savvy veterinarian relationships, and then again, networking transfers and rescue placements. We're going to leverage additional House Rabbit Society strengths, and this is not an all-inclusive list. So understanding law enforcement relationships, again, from an actual discovery and prosecution of the cases, and then replicating an existing media relations plan, and Edie has a really great example from Georgia HRS. I'm going to hand it over to Mara.
Hi, I'm Mara Hurwitz. If you don't know me, I am the legal advisor to House Rabbit Society. I am not licensed in California. I'm required by the California Bar to give you this disclaimer. I am not licensed to practice law in California. I'm licensed in Virginia and in the District of Columbia. Thank you. So, law and order rabbit confiscation. I tried to get my phone to do the da-da, but so I couldn't, so let's all do it together. Da-da. So this is going to be a very high-level overview of just a few things that you need to be thinking of for confiscations, because Dawn kept getting questions about, are you going to talk about law enforcement? I said, no, but Mara can talk about law enforcement. So rapid confiscation, much as what Dawn was talking about, when you are dealing with these, you don't want to be doing them on the fly. You want to understand all this ahead of time. While you have time, because of course we all have lots of time, do this, find this stuff out. Next slide. So it's important to establish relationships. And you need to know in your jurisdiction, and this is, this can be like a project for one of your volunteers. Go look into it if you don't already know and find out who does what as far as animal cruelty investigations, what animal control does, what the police department does, what the sheriff does, humane officers, how all of that works. And so you want to get to know who those people are and establish contact and know, so that if something happens, you already know who you're going to be working with. You're a known quantity. You're not just showing up cold calling them. And they may even reach out to you because they know we have a big rabbit confiscation. Oh, those are the people who are dealing with it. Next slide. So, law enforcement. This is the really complicated part. Who investigates animal cruelty and neglect in your jurisdiction? Well, it depends where you are. It may be any one of these. The ACOs, you may have humane officers associated with your SPCA or your humane society. It may be your sheriff, which is usually not the best thing. Maybe your local police department. And your local police department may have specially trained detectives, which is really good. So I found a study from 2012 that said 34 states at that time, their animal cruelty statutes allowed humane officers to actually investigate the cruelty cases, and in most cases, they were allowed to have the power to execute a search warrant, to seize animals if they were there, evidence right then of cruelty or severe neglect, and they could also have arrest powers. But that means those states authorize it, they make it, but every county and city may do it differently. So I give you my example. I'm in Northern Virginia. I live in Fairfax County. In Fairfax County, if it's an animal cruelty case, you call the police department. It's Fairfax County PD, and they have specially trained detectives who go out and investigate those, who have had training to do that. Now, in Arlington County next door, Arlington County, the Animal Welfare League of Arlington County has humane officers. They have animal control. They are a private 501c3, but they are under contract to the county and city of Arlington to do their animal control. So they go out and do some of that. But they aren't necessarily what we call sworn officers. So for some of that, they'll have a police officer come with them. Because in some jurisdictions, your humane officer can carry a firearm. The city of Fairfax, they're uniformed, but they can't carry a firearm. So what I'm going to tell you is, please do not come up to me later and say, hey, I live such and such, what do we do in my county? It's like, I don't even know all the 50 states laws. And Canada, I'm going to guess that you guys do it differently, and there's a good chance that maybe it's more of a federal kind of thing, and it's all national, and I don't know if all the provinces do it differently in Canada, so I have no idea. So what I'm going to tell you is, find out now who you're going to have to deal with and who has which authority, who does the arrest. The people who investigate may not be able to go in and actually seize the animals, and they may not be able to actually execute an arrest warrant either. So it's a great, you got like a college student intern or a high school intern, somebody wants to do this for a project, and go figure this out, how to do this. Next slide, please. So, and then, the other half of law and order, the police who investigate the crimes, and the district attorney's office who prosecute the offenders. So it's called prosecutorial discretion, which comes down to, it's just a bunch of rabbits. I have murders and rapes to deal with. Or I do animal cruelty, but it's dog fighting. So when I go to the Prosecuting Animal Cruelty Conference, what I see is a lot of presentations on dealing with dog fighting. I'm not minimizing that. I mean, we all know the Michael Vick story that was in Virginia where I live. But they did actually have 2 presentations. There were 2 ADAs who, of their case studies, both had to do with prosecuting cruelty cases involving rabbits. So it is possible to get people to prosecute those. But get to know people in your DA's office beforehand, again, so that if it happens and you want to encourage them to prosecute, you already have established that relationship. And a lot of places, I found this like in Prince William County, which is also the next county over from me. They have a particular ADA, and okay, I'll tell you, it's usually a young female assistant district attorney, and she gets the cruelty cases. So, hey, you know, and that may not be so bad, because sometimes those defense attorneys are going to underestimate her. So, you know, and if it's a big cruelty case, you can reach out to like Animal Legal Defense Fund and all that to help. But what I want you to say one thing about working with the DA's office. I talked about this just briefly last year in response to, or last conference in response to a question. Collecting evidence, you know, when you go, if you go on site, take photographs, take video, take your rulers and your yardsticks, document everything that you can, because if you're the ones on scene, you may actually do a better job of collecting evidence there that can be introduced later, and your DA will be more likely to prosecute because there's actually evidence that can be used. So, you know, possible penalties. This is the other thing I want you to think about is, yeah, once in a while somebody gets jail time. Usually they, you know, might get a fine, might get probation or deferred prosecution, it's called in some jurisdictions. But a lot of states now allow for the cost of care, that they will make them so if your rescue is the one who's caring for those rabbits and they're not available for adoption yet because the court case is pending and you're running up all these bills, and the vet bills in particular, in some states it's actually written into the statutes that the judge can order them to pay the cost of care. Of course, if they're flat broke, you're never going to see it, but it's at least worth asking for. Sometimes what the judge does, so you don't have them sitting there waiting for a whole thing, they give him or her the opportunity and say, at an early hearing, you can relinquish them now, or you can post bond to cover the costs of care while this progresses through the system. So sometimes that's actually, that part of the law is a good way to help them, you know, force their hand to get them to give up the rabbits then instead of, you know. But the other thing, and we've been there a lot, is always ask the prosecutor to make sure that in the things he asks for in the sentencing is a bar on allowing this person to get more rabbits. Because, okay, she had 85, but we think she can take care of 6, so we're going to let her keep 6 rabbits. And there's nothing in the court order talking about spay or neuter. So where will we be 12 months from now with those 6 rabbits? So that is really all that I wanted to talk to you about, is just a little brief thing. So the important thing is get to know those people, find out how it works in your jurisdiction, and know it before you need it.
Thanks, Mara. Okay, so we're going to talk about first catching rabbits on the lam. Animal enforcement agencies actually do have strengths. They're paid to catch rabbits on the lam, or catch animals that are at large. They have the time. Unfortunately, they usually do not have the expertise. This rabbit on the slide, his name is Eaton, and we were asked to come and catch him because the animal control officer was unable to, and she chased him for 2 blocks carrying an X-Pen down the street, and then he hid underneath a shed. So we were able to get him. Rabbit savvy volunteers really have the experience, they have the expertise, the coordination, and most importantly, the patience to catch rabbits on the lam, because as Dr. B mentioned yesterday, rabbit rescuers are passionate. Reconnaissance, or we call recon, is the key. So, we'll get an email, we'll get a call. We ask a lot of very targeted questions. What time of the day? What time of the day is the rabbit usually seen? Where is the rabbit usually seen? Another thing that's really important in recon is getting the lay of the land, understanding what obstacles exist to catching the rabbit, like if there's like a deep ravine or something like that, so that when you actually request volunteers, like Kimberly had talked about this morning, that you have a sufficient number of volunteers to be able to effectively catch the rabbits. The other thing that is really critical is getting permission from all of the property you're going to be traipsing on. So if you're in one yard and the rabbit goes into the next yard, you can't be like, oh, sorry, I didn't talk to these people yet. Where it gets a little dicey is if somebody actually has rabbits in an outdoor hutch, and they're like at large in the neighborhood, is trying to keep the rabbits away from the owners, so that, not having them go back into that yard, because once they're back on their property, then they can, basically you can't go on the property. So we utilize X-pens or flexible fences to cut off escape paths. In general, if you have 1 or 2 rabbits, you can have 2 volunteers per X-pen. You bring the X-pens, forward, you gradually surround the rabbit, and 1 or 2 rabbits can be pretty easy. Depending upon how long the rabbit has been out, if they haven't been out for very long, there are some rabbits that are like, please catch me. That frequently is not the case, so the rabbits can really, I call it, they're just limbic. They are so stressed and they have such an adrenaline response that you have to be really careful when you're bringing the X-pens in, because if the rabbit is really limbic and they're thrashing around, they could really hurt themselves. And I can attest to the fact, as well as probably other people, that when you pick these rabbits up, you can really get hurt yourself, because they scratch and thrash and things like that. So just being careful. Next slide. I would call an X-pen a flexible fence. You'd want it probably 30 inches tall. If it's less than 24 inches tall, the rabbits will jump over it. So we actually had experience catching a large rabbit group. Actually, there were 2 large rabbit groups at the time, one in Beech Grove and one in Hendricks County. So I'm going to focus on Rabbit Ray. So he was a well-intending individual in a neighboring county that accepted any rabbits that people did not want. There was no spay or neuter, there was no veterinary care. He provided food, which was really great, and he had limited self-performed treatments for the rabbits. From people that had actually visited Rabbit Ray, these are like Good Samaritans, he evidently really loved the rabbits, and he grieved when they died and things like that. But unfortunately, Rabbit Ray died. And when he died, the executors of his estate, basically, they were kind of like, oh, these rabbits will take care of themselves. So Good Samaritans were feeding them, and they're feeding them bread and things that they definitely should not have been eating. But as the population of rabbits dwindled, the Good Samaritans, they could see that the rabbits weren't as healthy. They were subject to predation. So they basically contacted Indiana House Rabbit Society. So there were approximately 50 rabbits that were still alive that were rounded up. Large group strategies are different than 1 or 2 rabbits. It's really important to establish a feeding schedule, especially a feeding schedule of things that rabbits like. Somebody had mentioned, it was the Rabbit Island talk. That people were putting carrots out there and things like that. We're talking, big bales of hay, pelleted food feeders. This was kind of in the late summer, so water is really important. But just, basically get the rabbits accustomed to having people around them. Many different strategies are required. Depending upon where you live, the rabbits could dig burrows, and of course that would be a major avenue of escape that you would have to block off. You can also have basically hideouts, so like big scrub or brush piles. Rabbits get into those piles, and there's really limited things that you can do. And the X-pen strategy needs to be a little bit different, because these rabbits that have been out for a long time are limbic. So you need to really have, instead of 2 volunteers per X-pen, probably 3 volunteers per X-pen, and having volunteers at the ready with carriers so that you can pick the rabbits up as quickly as possible and get them to safety. If you leave the X-pen out, they're gonna break out. So again, because these rabbits are limbic, I mean, they have been so focused on survival that they don't even view you as a help, they view you as a predator, where you really are predators, but we're benevolent helping predators. And I'd like to talk a little bit about live traps. So you have to use those with caution. If you're in an area with, big, like really significant risk of predation, you really can't use live traps unless you have people that are checking them very, very, very frequently, because a rabbit in a trap becomes food for a coyote or for another predator. So I just wanted to put use live traps with caution. We've also used flexible nets very safely. The flexible nets, that would be, because when you go to help one rabbit, it's like warren thing. So basically, one rabbit takes off, and everybody's like, "Whoa!" Everybody takes off. So it becomes almost like a flock of birds, like a flock of bunnies, running off into the sunset. So we have found that using the flexible nets, not to trap the rabbits that way, but basically keeping them upright, so when they run, they just run right into the net, and then you just turn the top of the net so it's down, so then the rabbits can't get out, and then you can actually pick them up and put them in the carrier. So you minimize all of the thrashing and all of that. Next slide. The next case, and Benita had mentioned the 650 plus rabbits in 2013. Our local animal control had a confiscation of Rexes that started at 375 and ended up being, 425 or 450. So they called me and basically said, hey, we'd like to consult with you on a potential investigation. I'm like, okay, great. So they tell me what's going on. I'm like, oh, that's really unfortunate. And then they're like, can you take the rabbits? I'm like, and they said it was 150 rabbits housed outside. And I said, we don't have the facilities to take 150 rabbits. And they're like, yeah, we'll get back to you. So they ended up executing a search warrant. Fortunately, it was broad enough that it covered the entire property. And there weren't 150 rabbits, there were 375 plus rabbits. Because our animal control did not have housing for 375 rabbits, nor did we, they actually picked up the breeder cages, put them in their horse trailers, and drove them to the shelter. And then they picked up they took the rabbits, the carriers, or the cage banks out, put the rabbits in other cages, then thoroughly disinfected everything, and put them back into the same cages. It was a high-profile case. It was Richard Harthauser, who he still is the vice president of the Indiana Rabbit Breeders Association and the president of the Indiana Minutex Club. Next slide. So hands-on shelter care. The shelter was severely understaffed, and they were really, really ill-equipped to provide the care. Because there were so many rabbits, and summertime intakes tend to be highest in shelters, they put these banks of cages in their 20-bay garage. And when we started out, there were 3 full bays that were just wall-to-wall rabbits with cages. Kimberly had mentioned this morning about matching the right volunteers with the right opportunities. We really required a large number of volunteers with a very specific skill set in this type of a situation. So performing hands-on care for confiscation rabbits is really not for the faint of heart. So if you have somebody that is a very emotional person, this probably isn't the right volunteer opportunity for them. The other thing that I think really needs to be mentioned is active investigations really require a tremendous amount of discretion. In the event that people start chatting on social media and people start posting things on the internet and folks start blogging about things, that can really compromise the active investigation. So when our volunteers come in to a situation like this, we say no posts on social media, we have to only talk to each other, nothing in email. I mean, we really ratchet down the communication. Next slide. From a daily rabbit care perspective, we are great at caring for house rabbits. We actually had to care for 375 rabbits housed in completely, substandard conditions. So they had, fans that were blowing. It was 95 plus degrees, 100% humidity. The conditions were really harsh. So we started out by, everybody came after work, they cleaned all of the cages, dumped all of the trays, made certain that everybody had food and water, and left. We were provided feedback that the rabbits were quote unquote too messy, and that flies actually, they were attracting flies, and that really didn't reflect well upon our group or the shelter. So we actually had to ratchet it up to volunteers coming twice a day to clean the cage trays. And it was hundreds of cage trays. The other thing, we were not allowed to make any diet changes. So because it was an active investigation, the shelter did not have custody of the rabbits. They were still the property of the breeder. We basically had to feed the rabbits according to the breeder standards. Again, very specific skill set, because there's some people that would just be too difficult for them. Mothers were housed in very small cages with litters of kits. They were literally crawling all over one another. It was really heartbreaking work. I mean, it took 10 days for the case to move to a point where rabbits could be removed for rescue. And it took us an additional 25 days to actually find rescue placement. So this was something that we did for greater than 30 days, and it was incredibly difficult. So our volunteers were really helpful with providing medical evaluation and triage. The owner contested the seizure, so then it became, they had the documentation on the site of, substandard care, but then they had to really start making a medical case. What's going on with the rabbits? We were only allowed to trim nails and to provide concerns to the shelter veterinarian. So we consulted with Susan Brown, who's been involved in many, many large-scale confiscations, and we leveraged a rabbit-savvy veterinarian that we had worked with for years to come on site and evaluate the rabbits. Next slide. So rabbits displayed a variety of illnesses, and these are, I kind of consider these like run-of-the-mill like confiscation illnesses. So syphilis, Pediella, Seroptes, pododermatitis, because they were Rexes. Almost all of the rabbits, except for the youngest ones, had at least calluses. The standard Rexes actually were the worst off, and you could actually visibly see the rabbits picking up 1 foot at a time to basically provide themselves relief from the pain. There was coccidia, so lots of mucousy stools, upper respiratory infections, and the youngest rabbits were actually suffering from heat exhaustion. The treatment that the rabbits received, because this individual provided rabbits for consumption, had to meet with food animal standards. So no Baytril, no marbofloxacin. We could treat the syphilis with penicillin. The only antibiotic that we were allowed to use was sulfatrim. That was it. Litters were born every day during this period, and the youngest rabbits were really struggling. We had to keep really meticulous notes because everything is subject to discovery. We did have good partnership with the shelter veterinarian, who was not rabbit savvy. So we basically did, after the vet had performed the initial evaluation, we were basically able to get some treatment protocols established so that when additional rabbits, basically turned up with illnesses, that we could just basically, put the rabbit under our arm, carry them back to the shelter. The vet would look at the rabbit. She would say, yes, we can institute the treatment protocols. We were medicating 50 rabbits, probably more at some points, with various medications. They had different frequencies, they had different dosing strategies, different treatment durations, and on a daily basis, we were giving more than 10 rabbits a day sub-Q fluids, and that actually saved a lot of rabbits' lives, especially for the really young rabbits. So we implemented a color-coded index card system. So if somebody was receiving Albon for coccidia, they had a yellow card, and sulfatrim was a pink card. And so what we did was we put the rabbit's number, their ID number from the shelter, We put the medication that they were receiving, the dose that they were receiving, and how often. And then what we were doing was on a legal pad on a daily basis, Monday morning, date, these are all the rabbits we medicated and this is how we medicated them. Next, please. As the rabbits were released for placement, a lot of the receiving rescue groups, understandably, because this was an active breeder, wanted altered rabbits. And that put a lot of stress on our system. We were fortunate that we had a humane society with a surgical suite that they made available for us, and they had 2 tables, so we could with 2 veterinarians working, we were able to, like on a Sunday, I think that the most that we did was 35 rabbits, and that was mostly spays with a few neuters. All rabbits receive physical examinations prior to surgery. In the first wave of rabbits, actually one of my foster rabbits, it was a male, died intraoperatively during his neuter, which is really atypical. And the necropsy identified insidious pneumonia as the cause of death. So at that point, we had to, we consulted with Susan Brown, and we basically said, hey, this is going on. So then for all future rabbits that were altered, and there were a significant number of them, we basically had 3 days of Baytril prior to surgery and then completed antibiotic treatments for 7 days after surgery. And that, we didn't have any other deaths after that. Our transfer strategy that we came up with, and this honestly, I didn't have this as a vision. It was more, I was very tactical, and I was, taking care of rabbits and, coordinating the volunteers at the shelter. And there were other people that basically said, hey, I want to work, and they were really organized. So the transfer strategy really requires volunteers that are not included in daily care. Because that so basically you have the people providing the care, and then you have the additional volunteers, the really organized ones that are generating a list of rabbits that are available for rescue. And then we had a dedicated networking team that were reaching out to rescues and said, hey, we have a situation, can you help out? If you can't help out, if you can or cannot help out, hey, do you have any other groups that you work with that you could recommend? And to be honest with you, when we started this transfer strategy, basically we were told by the head of the enforcement for animal control in the beginning, oh, we're gonna, pack up all these rabbits and we're gonna go to a sanctuary in Texas. And I was like, I don't think that that's the right idea. And then we started reaching out to people, people who had visited the sanctuary, and we basically, gave the information back to animal control, and they were like, yeah, we're not going to send them. So then it became our responsibility to find placements for the rabbit. So, like I said, then in addition to the dedicated people that were doing the networking, while you're networking, then we had other people that were working on the transfer part of it. Because you can't network and arrange the transfers because there's just too much correspondence going on all the time. Amy Remnerain basically captured some elements of the rescue strategy, but she actually has taken it to it's far improved. And there's a link to her research that she's developed. And we thank her for launching it in our first Educators bi-monthly conference. So there are ethical considerations when you start transferring rabbits. You have to make certain that the receiving market has a demand for rabbit adoptions. If rescues have hundreds of rabbits and they only adopt out 10 per year, you do not want to send any additional rabbits there. Receiving shelters should not euthanize rabbits for space, so you're looking for no-kill shelters, or shelters that do transfer to rabbit rescues where you would have with a commitment from another rescue that they would be the safety net. And then the destination shelter and the rescue groups really have to have strong infrastructure to make certain that that not only can they receive the rabbits, but that they can care for them and spay neuter if they're not spay neutered. Identifying rescue partners, it's really best if you've had an on-site visit. In the event that you have not had an on-site visit, if you have firsthand experience with, like rabbit savvy volunteers, or you have a relationship with somebody on staff, especially if it. So we have in Evansville, we have one of our shelter partners. And the manager actually used to work at Almost Home Humane Society in Lafayette. So that would be an example of, hey, I already know Wendy, and I know that she sets up a good program, and so Evansville has a good program. Then you would go to like trusted resources that have in-person experience with the shelter, and you also want to. There could be chatter potentially on concerns. And you definitely want to trust local humane advocates that are on the ground. Next, please. Health certifications. This is also a huge stress on emergency confiscation. So some receiving shelters and states require health certifications. You have to be USDA APHIS certification, so not all veterinarians can actually can issue health certs. The exams have to occur within 7 days of travel. Rabbits cannot display any symptoms of disease. And if you have a receiving shelter, like I'm going to throw out Animal Humane Society, where they said we can take 35 rabbits, you couldn't take 35 rabbits for health certifications because they want healthy rabbits, so you really had to go to like 1 1/4 or 1.5 times the number of rabbits, so that the rabbits that were identified as sick would be segregated and treated, and only the healthy rabbits were moved onto transports. And the reason that that's so critical, A, you want to be a good rescue partner. If they give you core requirements, you want to make certain that you're sticking with the requirements that they've given you. And then, the other thing, when you have 375 rabbits at the shelter, and yes, you had a veterinarian, walk through there with an initial assessment, we had all of these rabbits that we treated. And some of the treatments just were not effective. Were not as effective as we would have liked, especially with having to treat them using the production animal standards versus using contemporary veterinary knowledge. Next slide. Transport guidelines. Again, the resource on rabbit.org provides really great information. I just captured a few bullet points just to kind of get people thinking. So having ID cards with a photo of the rabbit on it, so that you have the card, you have the rabbit, and you know where the rabbit is going to go. Frequently on transports, we would transport 50 rabbits at the same during one transport, and 3 would go to here, and 5 would go there, and 30 would go here, and it can get especially when you're at the point where you're segregating rabbits to different organizations, it can be really confusing. The driver should have a transport manifest, and also, which also includes the health certifications. Hard-sided carrier should be used, lined with sufficient absorbent material, and that can either be, towels. Actually, we're planning a transport next weekend from Florida, and one of the requests was that the cages have a lot of Carefresh in it. Which again, Carefresh is absorbent material. The rabbits will be housed overnight, so we're going to, sweep out the Carefresh, give them new Carefresh. But again, you really want the rabbits to be in as good a shape and with the least amount of stress possible. And having them in filthy carriers it's not going to set the rabbits up for success. It has it could damage your reputation. Like, what's with these Indiana people sending these rabbits with these horrible carriers. The rabbit should have hay at all times. As we know, it's not uncommon for rabbits not to eat during transport because when the car is moving, because they're so stressed out. So at rest stops, you need to provide water to the rabbits. It's great if the rabbits have been exposed to grains. With highly compromised animals, veterinarians go both ways, like, oh yeah, you could probably provide grains and it's okay, or no, I don't know, with these rabbits if I really recommend it. But again, water, and if you do have grains, as other people have mentioned, to increase hydration, serve them sopping wet. A strategy that I've used recently for a transport, where I arrived the night before and then drove the rabbits back to Indianapolis, I actually did kind of like a mini health check on the rabbits, and anybody that looked like they might be even a little dehydrated, they got a bolus of sub-Q fluids. That really helped set those rabbits up for success and help them bounce back faster. You want to avoid excessively long drives. Again, the rabbits get highly stressed. They have to have rest stops. If you're driving for more than 9 hours a day, it's really tough on the rabbits. Edie is going to cover the Gwinnett County, Georgia confiscation, and this is really going to highlight the importance of an effective media relations plan.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm back talking about media a little bit here. It's been a couple of years.
Louder.
Okay, is that better? Okay. It's been a couple of years since we did the Gwinnett County confiscation. It was the largest one we have done. Others are much, much larger, but we were faced with a terrible situation. We had been going after this lady for about a year. She's a combination, difficult, complicated kind of something. She is, well, I thought I was talking pretty loud. I don't want to blow y'all out, but man, should I come a little closer then? Okay. She was a complicated person, part hoarder, part reader. She was using the rabbits to make money with her little pet. It's called Pet Parties Plus. You can still look at our own Googler. She had a business going, had birthday parties, all this kind of stuff with other animals too besides rabbits, but she had over 200 rabbits in her backyard in the heat of the summer. And we had been reporting her to the Department of Agriculture. Now, as Mayor had talked, every state is different to who you report these things to. In Georgia, it's the Department of Agriculture. You have to be licensed. We had laws on the books, thank goodness, because we were eventually able to prosecute her, which was really, really good. Actually, quite quickly we did. However, what happened and where the story started, and if you can see in the little block there, that's Serafina. And we actually did publish a story in the House Rabbit Journal about how Serafina saved 180 of her friends. And it became quite a story in that some people had been going by the outside. She had a big, huge house and barn and all this. And she had a hutch out by her driveway. And this wasn't the first time rabbits had been put in this hutch with a sign saying free rabbit. Anytime a rabbit got sick or she wanted to get rid of it or whatever, she stuck it out on the curb for the garbage to pick up, pretty much. That was how it was going. And this person had been driving by and seen the rabbit in the cage for 3 days. The third day, he absolutely couldn't stand it because he saw her kind of tilting, and he got out of his car and he went in. There was no food, no water, no nothing except just wire and the bunny, and she was in distress. It was over 90 degrees. So he called us, he found us, and she was on our radar. We immediately called the Department of Agriculture and the Gwinnett Animal Control. Then that night, I got a call. I was at the shelter. I got a call from the officer, and she says, we're going in tomorrow. He went out and counted, and there's over 200 rabbits. And so I said to her, I said, we'll be there. She said, can we come? Because she said, we have no idea what to do with 200 rabbits. They weren't even really thrilled with doing this. But I said to her, fortunately, it dawned on me. I said, can we get media involved in this? And she said, well, I can't tell you to do that, but you need to do what you got to do. And she later regretted that statement because I immediately hung up and called. We do have a great person. Her name's Ann Eisenhower, who's a great PR person, and she knows the media. So I made a phone call. I said, Ann, we got this situation, and they want us to meet them tomorrow at her house. And we had already taken in the bunny. He brought the bunny to us, and it was a terrible situation. She was very sick. She was diagnosed with EC, and we treated her. She's doing fine now. She never totally recovered from the tilt, but she's doing good and bonded with another head-tail bunny, so it's real sweet. Anyway, but getting back to the media. Ann said, this is the story. I'm on it. She called me the next morning. She said, Edie, I've contacted every media and they're going to be there, because we had a 1 o'clock time. And I said, okay. Still not really thinking any really big deal. I expected maybe 1 or 2 or something, you know. And she called me back and there was some other things going. Gwinnett got a word that media was going to be there. They were angry. But by the time we showed up and I brought our veterinarian, it's very important to be in touch with your veterinarian. And we also do have a lawyer, and she was alerted. And we really didn't have this plan in place. It just sort of fell into place because we knew we were up against something bigger than we had done before. And we get there at 1 o'clock, and media's there, and so is Gwinnett Animal Control, and they're saying, you can come up here, but they're not allowed. So media had to stay on the street. And at first when I got there was 1 TV station and a couple of the print media. By the time an hour had passed, every print media that we have in the local area and all 3 news stations were there. And a helicopter was circling. I was like, and then I was having to go back and forth between the situation in her backyard and the media. It was kind of a really, a situation I was not really prepared for. Since I've thought a lot about it and am now, and it opened up our eyes to the power of the media and what it can accomplish. Now, getting back to the rabbits, we would not have saved those rabbits had it not been for the media. Gwinnett had no desire to take them in and spend the money that it was going to take to save those rabbits. And the lady would not come out. She said she was out of town. She's big. You know, they're sick people. They're just sick. But anyway, they didn't want to deal with her. She was politically connected. It became a really tough situation. But the media was there, and they carried the story. Gwinnett could not back down. They had to confiscate. Without the media, they were talking, the first thing they told me, well, they're okay. And I looked at one cage that was 2 by 6 and counted 22 rabbits in it. They couldn't move. It was horrific. And they were saying the rabbits are okay. I said, no. Now they had food galore, you know, the big pellet things, they were fed. And there was some little bits of water, not much. And in the meantime, there was a little rabbit that had been let go, and it was running around. Picked that rabbit up, it was very sick. So I'm taking the rabbit out because they told me I could take it because Gwinnett did not want to confiscate. Well, what happened was they ended up taking all the bunnies the next day because the media erupted. And they had no choice to be embarrassed or whatever if they didn't confiscate. They put them in a warehouse about the size of this, and we had to deal with Gwinnett for 3 weeks. It was a long story, but I'm not, you can read more about Seraphina's story. But we ended up saving these rabbits with the power of the media and how they did it. You first have to know to successfully pitch the story. Get someone that can do it for you. You're going to be dealing with the rabbits and doing all that Dawn has talked about. Make sure you have a good person for that. Put the media pressure on them. Get animal control involved because you can't do it by yourself at first. You need time. You've got to have a space to take those rabbits, and you've got to have a way to help them. Next slide. I think, is that the last slide? Oh, okay. I wanted to just say just a little bit more, if I have just a couple of minutes, about when you pitch your media story. Something that we have recently found that's very, very successful is to offer a reward. Go to one of your major donors, like we talked about yesterday, and see if they will escrow $1,000 for offering a reward to anyone who can be prosecuted in any kind of confiscation or dump. It has become a powerful media tool for us. We all get the occasional dumps of 28 rabbits or 32 or whatever. If you get someone that'll put it up, you only pay upon successful prosecution. But the media can use that as a tool to get you more media coverage. I want to tell you, this story resulted in us over $75,000 in donations for us. They came from all over the world, Germany, Australia, everywhere. It's powerful. I had no idea. We needed every bit of that for medical, etc. We couldn't have helped all of those rabbits. We were able to do the transportation with a lot of Dawn's help too, and other people's helps to get them to that animal humane. We transferred out 80, but we ended up absorbing 160 of them into our system, only transferring out 80, so we ended up with 80. It's not an easy thing to do. You need the money. You can't do it without it. Funding is important. Get that.
Nice.
So, Debbie was talking about the 3 different types of personalities in rescue: idealists, realists, and sensitivity people. So, this is my idealist slide. So, from a future vision standpoint, I really think that the rescue community really needs to start networking and building relationships in order to to pull together and help more rabbits. I have a desire to start, basically to create an international rabbit rescue network. House Rabbit Society chapters, non-House Rabbit Society chapters, shelters, basically anyone who has good adoption programs that we can basically create a flexible, basically a shelter transfer or a transfer map across the country. And my hashtag is nobody left behind, and I actually have reserved that domain name. House Rabbit Society has formed an emergency rescue committee. I'm the chair for that. If anybody is interested in volunteering on the committee, my email address is there, and I know that there are non-House Rabbit Society rescue groups that are also participating today and actually like scanning name tags. Many of the people actually stepped up and helped us during the mini-Rex confiscation, so thank you very much for helping us at our time of need, and I would love to be able to help other groups at their time of need, sort of paying it forward. Next slide. So again, conclusions, you have to develop an emergency preparedness plan. Optimally, you want to do this before the confiscation. Networking and building relationships are really key in all of the work that we do. And as other speakers have identified, it's important with recruiting and retaining volunteers and interacting with other rescue groups and veterinarians and shelters and animal control organizations. Organized, coordinated efforts are really required to effectively manage an unexpected influx of rabbits. And the strategies covered in this presentation have actually been used successfully to help place more than 400 rabbits in the last 1.5 years. And that's all I have.